In this episode, we discuss just how far is too far in challenging your faith. Is mental illness actually demon possession? And we touch on the conversation of aliens and spirits. Enjoy! You're listening to Campfire Theology, where we explore topics you usually wouldn't discuss in church. So gather around with us, because we believe the conversation itself is holy.
What's Ramsey say?
Somebody says something like, yeah, it's in the Bible. It's in second hesitation.
That's where I think the fear sometimes comes from for Christians. It's not talking about some of these things because
You don't want to, like
what am I?
your faith.
Yeah, what if I'm too influenced by?
Yeah.
You know, and that's where when I was reading that Dawkins book, maybe it's just because whatever I read, I really
You get very
ingest.
ingest.
Yeah, you're very it's sort of like. I don't know. It's very compelling to me.
I would say I don't want to use the word gullible. That's not the word, but you are like a natural believer.
Sure.
Like when you read something, you want to believe it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that would be a little dangerous with that personality too can open the door too wide or whatever, right?
You didn't say gullible, but you implied it.
I didn't. Gullible is such a negative thing, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that way. So don't take it that way.
Easily influenced.
Not even that, just like you're kind of like a positive outlook on stuff, and you want to believe things, and you're quick to oh yeah, that makes I like that.
You are the two opposite ends of the spectrum.
And I'm like I'm such a good thing now.
Yeah, that's true. And I like how that you insulted me quite a bit there without me.
Wasn't that nice? Kind of like a backhanded.
Yeah, it was
compliment.
very, very good. It was sort of like imbecilic
in the
thing.
Yeah, that's fast.
It reminds me of what was the insult you did on him?
Yeah. I don't even know because
It was about his weight or his brains or
it was something about
in fact, he doesn't say any of those things. I'm sorry I made fun of you for being retarded. You didn't say that.
Well, I guess it was one of those things I just thought. But yeah, so that's my fear is sometimes with myself, because I do believe in those kinds of things. And sometimes for me, it's I feel like God honors that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That he's yeah, you should believe in me. Can people live for 900 years? Absolutely.
See,
God can do anything.
I agree. I agree. So I don't
do anything. Why does God have to fit into our ideas of science?
I completely agree with that.
You know what I mean?
Science is always catching up to religion.
Yeah, it really shouldn't be adversarial at all, but it is, but yeah, for me,
but that's where my small brain, I'm that's my skeptic, right?
Right,
It's
900
probably meant 90.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and maybe it did. I don't know, but I just feel
but I agree with you. Sorry to keep cutting you off, but
no,
I completely agree. God can do anything. If it says 900 and we get to heaven, he's like, no, it's really 900. Like, really? Oh, cool.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not gonna be like, no way, God, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll believe it.
And it has to be longer than we are now because the Bible said it was too long.
Yeah,
it doesn't say exactly that.
Yeah, it does.
Yes,
It says
it does.
your days will be less than 125, I believe.
Genesis chapter 6, verse 3. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with men forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't say I made you guys live too long. 120 is the max.
Well, I took it as that. I've always taken it as that. I've always looked to see is there anybody that's older than 120 years old? Because that honestly has been fascinating to me. Where I'm I don't really. I'm not sure if I've ever seen
the Guinness
anybody
record is older. I thought I saw a 130. You should Google that real quick.
How old is the oldest human?
But also it's like a third world country. They don't have birth certificates and stuff. So that's not super.
122 years.
The verified. one.
Yeah, but how verified are they? It's 122. There's no one there to actually verify it.
So I guess you could take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, the French.
So
Can't trust anything.
Sorry to our French listeners.
Right, yeah.
For those of you in Paris, I mean that with all due respect.
Right. It said this guy 122 years, but apparently Brother Ewan lived longer than
he fasted for 122 years.
244.
No water or food.
No.
So I got one question on Josh's topic because that was good.
On the
where you talked about
slowing test?
No, where you kind of mentioned about, because I've always been the same way. The older I get and the more I feel like I've learned about faith and like talking with people like you, I like challenging it. I like asking questions. I like, not that I'm debating my faith at all, but I just like to probe it more. And I like the idea that
like an alien probe. Alien probe.
Yes,
Yes.
It was.
I like the idea though of, or I used to be the same way of, like you said, is I almost don't want to go down some of those paths because I don't want to have to question it. Kind of like what you said, like where you read it, you get really engrossed in it, like you believe it, you get into it. I almost feel like there is a point where we are supposed to challenge our faith, but at the same time, there's got to be stuff that God said, like, okay, stay away from too, just because you can challenge it almost too much to where you're going down the wrong rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know doesn't the Bible talk about like staying away from kind of like witchcraft or
definitely.
like, like
definitely.
even things like Ouija boards and things like you're not challenging it. You're playing with the dark arts almost.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you guys
Harry Potter, for example.
Right.
Halloween.
Halloween.
Yeah.
Famous magician. I heard somebody famous. I heard somebody call him a famous magician once.
Harry Potter?
Yeah.
It was probably my wife.
That's
Isn't he like the famous magician?
It probably was.
I know. She's like cannot fathom stuff like that. Like Star Wars, Harry Potter. She's like, I do not understand why anybody would have even the slightest interest in.
I'll watch like sci-fi movies and stuff, and my wife thinks they're awful. Like any of that stuff, so terrible.
Yeah.
If you're listening, we love you.
Yeah. We are surprised that you're listening.
First of all, thank you.
Right,
Second,
you're deep into hour 12.
Yeah. But do you guys think, if there is anything, like, do you think there's stuff we're supposed to stay away from as Christians? And
definitely. I think I have like a safeguard up of digging too deep into anything demonic or like Ouija boards or anything along those lines. I'll never forget. There's one night that have you ever heard was it Pink Floyd when you play it backwards?
Yeah.
So I get super So I get super
the whole album.
I get super curious about that, and I listen to it.
I have that album literally on vinyl.
Do you?
Do you?
So I listened to it backwards, and it was like, whoa, like this is kind of wild to me. And then I felt in this weird, evil like presence.
Sure.
And definitely.
Well,
and it was the most like actually scared I've ever been.
Where you're like, yeah, I shouldn't be doing that.
Exactly. And I haven't ventured into that because I can totally see how somebody could get sucked into that, and the allure of it, of horror movies a lot of times, like even like just that whole genre, that becomes part of who you are.
There's a huge following for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's my wall.
So I feel like that's such an interesting, like you just said, there's huge following for that. Really completely agree. And it's like it almost speaks to like the spiritual void that we have,
right?
Yes,
and that we as like humans are wired to crave like a spiritual encounter,
right?
Yeah,
and some of us don't know. Like some people don't know that it should be a good spiritual encounter, right? Or they just are like, they're addicted almost to that feeling, like there's a presence in the room, that kind of thing. And like even just saying that out loud kind of makes me like,
like any sort of spiritual encounter is better than no spiritual encounter. It's similar to like somebody, like say they cut themselves or something. It's like they just want to feel something,
right?
As opposed to feeling nothing.
Yeah, I've heard that the cutting thing it does physically release those endorphins, or if it's
Oh, like cutting a wrist, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like
I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Releases like a good feeling. Maybe it's dopamine or serotonin or something. But
it must. Why else would you do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's like an obsessive part to it, and things like that. But like Kyle said, they're feeling something kind of thing. I think with the Dawkins book example, I couldn't have even started reading that unless I knew I was going to be able to talk about it with Kyle, because I can't get too into it.
Right.
It seemed unrefutable at points to me that oh, well, maybe this guy's got it right. And that was a scary thought for me.
Yeah.
Because, I've been following Jesus for my whole life. And, but and there's probably lots of things happening with my psychology that points to those ideas. But I think God wants us to talk about these things within sort of the safety of each other.
There we go.
Yeah.
So a fellowship kind of thing, especially if it's even like a mentorship or something like that with somebody who's like a pastor that can help guide you towards the
right. Yeah.
Yeah. How do I think about this without letting it consume me? The beginning of the Food Tape Letters talks just about that, right?
Right.
Like, don't get too deep into this, because Lewis had to put on the voice of demons sort of for himself.
Yeah. Right.
And think how they thought. What can I do here to help? I mean, ultimately, his goal was to help Christians realize that there are lots of evil, things happening in the world, and sort of underlying everything.
And they asked him to do a second book, and he said no. He didn't want to go down that path again.
It's almost like method
acting deep down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like method acting, like the guys who become the Joker.
Exactly.
Right. So many of them have died.
Well, right.
Because they're tormented by getting into character. They have to get in such an evil, dark place.
Did you see who was it that was before Heath Ledger? Jack Nicklaus?
Jack Nicklaus.
How he told him before he gave the character, be super careful, because you'll go to a place that you didn't know was there. So when you take this role, be extremely careful. And then obviously we know what happened.
Yeah, what happened in the mental illness.
So can I read something to you guys real quick?
Have that. I mean, that was one thing I thought was he already sort of had some pre-mental health issues.
I wonder that, or if he became straight up possessed to the point of, we say mental illness, but and not to downplay that, but is there a point where it's oh, he's actually possessed and demons are acting within him?
Right.
Yeah, I think
to push him to do certain things.
Absolutely.
I would think yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're familiar with Ephesians. This is an interesting paragraph. I want to read this to you. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And it says, other demons are already experiencing punishment for their sins. Jude 1:6 mentions them. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling in heaven, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. On the great day. God has planned an eternal fire prepared for the devils and his angels, Matthew 25:41. And demons are aware of their eternal destination.
Mm-hmm.
In Matthew chapter 8, 2 demons shout at Jesus, "What do you want with us, Son of God?" They shouted, "Have you come to torture us before the appointed time?"
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Jesus was that the point where Jesus put him into pigs like a boss?
I
love
like
that,
a boss.
You know what? I'm gonna
get about
into these pigs.
Yeah.
Well, they asked for it. They said,
That's
at least drive us into
you're going to exit out, at least let us go into those pigs.
Right.
And then they ran off.
Right, because they inhabit beings.
And that's
exactly. So the spiritual sort of needs a physical. Is that kind of what you think?
Right. I almost feel
parasitic.
Exactly. Yes. So that's where I wonder about, with Heath Ledger. Did he become a host per se?
Yeah, I think he is
mentally ill.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on the opposite spectrum of that, for a similar scenario was Passion of Christ.
Okay.
He said,
how's that at?
Sorry. He was saying during that, I don't know if you've ever watched clips on him, but he talks about what he went through doing that role.
Yes.
And that he, like, the pain he went through, that he was, like, basically, like, the set had all these issues, and then it was almost like the devil tried to screw it up.
Yeah.
And that he actually went through a ton of suffering. Like, he actually broke ribs. When he was hanging on that cross scene, he dislocated some shoulders. He had, like, hypothermia from being out so long when they were trying to film it. Like, he had all these things to where it's like, he said he was completely attacked, essentially, by Satan doing that role.
Yeah.
But he knew, like, the mission that had to get out and go through it, and he, like, endured and did it. So it's kind of like on the opposite of the spectrum where he's doing, like, the godly thing, but then he also has suffered because of that.
Well, so I literally think as we're trying to set up the mics today and they're not working, it's
last time we had the same issue, right?
Right.
They record for half.
They worked at my house, and now I get here and spend an hour and you can't get them to work. And it's like, is that Satan at work trying to stop
and now
this
you're
conversation
on an Apple, which the bit in Apple is
no
fake hand. So it's like,
which was a man baby.
Well, Josh is making this monster.
Exactly. There's a 3/6.
So Deuteronomy chapter 9. When you enter the land, no, I want to start. Sorry, Deuteronomy 18, verse 10. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord, because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you.
It even says mediums that consult the dead.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that because so many people do that.
Like a psychic.
Yeah, I just never believed it. I think about
that. To me, I've always thought of that verse because the curiosity in me has always been like, oh, I would love to see a psychic and be like, hey, what do you have to say?
Tell my grandpa.
Like,
yeah. I know somebody that sounds like it's somebody close.
My wife asked me that. And I, same thing, and I told her, I'm like, I don't. She wanted to do it to try and talk to her, to like, to like tell me sorry, or like all the stuff. But and I knew her heart was 100% in the right place. And she asked me, I'm like, do not do that. That's a devil stuff. Like, that's just not. It's good advice. I don't think that's. Her heart was in the right place, but yeah, that stuff scares me. I
totally agree. I think that's the slippery slope.
Yeah, it talks about like,
and yet I have such a desire for it.
Well, and I,
isn't that interesting?
Totally.
That we had that desire.
That's the curiosity going the wrong way. I think. Don't you?
Right. I think. So.
Yeah, it's like we shouldn't enter into spiritual encounters outside of God.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a buddy that did. Like, he was very much searching for like the spiritual experience that you're talking about, Will, and he was doing like him or with a seance, or if it was a Ouija board or whatever, and he had, I don't know, you maybe you guys have heard of like familiar spirits or familiar demons or whatever. Like, there's in the Ouija board, the idea is that there's a spirit in there guiding your hand to the levels that communicating with you or with a group of people. And you ask it a question. And it's supposed to be directing your hand. No, you're moving it. No, I'm not moving it. Those sorts of things. So he was doing that. I think the story goes that he was doing it by himself in his house. And he was trying to basically channel the demon inside of there. And then he heard a loud, authoritative voice telling him to stop.
Who is this?
This was one of my buddies that he went to the church I went
interesting.
back when. And he was telling me that this was even before he was a real believer. He was not a Christian at that time. He heard an authoritative voice telling him to stop. Like he heard it like sort of like reverberate through his person. And that in retrospect, after he became a believer, he's like, I fully believe that was God telling me in that moment I needed to stop doing what I was doing.
Get away from this evil.
Yeah. This was hurting me.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So that God sort of like stepped in. I mean, he is the master. God can do whatever he wants to. So he could step into those moments. But if we know better to not do that, in the book of, is it First Samuel or Second Samuel, King Saul goes to consult the medium. And she brings up she supposedly brings up the spirit of like the prophet I think it is Samuel, the prophet Samuel, and brings him up, and he says X, Y, and Z to some. And so there's these ideas in the Bible.
Samuel is the prophet who anointed David as the favorite
Saul also?
Yes, he did also anoint Saul. And then God's favorite left Saul when Samuel anointed David as God's chosen one. Yeah. Different David for our listeners.
Not this David.
Right. It doesn't.
Yeah, in Corinthians it says that
the prophet Satan. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not that sorry to interrupt you. No, the witch, for our Star Wars fans, she's the Witch of Endor.
For our Star Wars fan,
which is me and Stormy.
For our fan,
she's a woman who was consulted by Saul to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. So this was after, like Will said, this was after David was anointed as king. So he had sort of fallen off the map, and Saul was doing whatever he could to try to gain back into power.
So part of my skepticism comes from the verse about like test the spirits.
Okay.
You're going to get
skepticism of what?
My general skepticism, like when I hear it, the brother Ewan or this guy is able to summon orbs or whatever. It's like, where is it? Yeah, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Satan, who demons follow, is a liar and the father of lies. Yeah.
So the Bible does say, it says test the spirit.
Test the spirits, yeah.
Okay.
And see that they are from God. So I always kind of cling to that a little bit because
how do you test the spirits?
I think I don't know that. I think what my interpretation of that verse is like use some discernment and understand, like if someone's making miraculous claims or whatever, is that from God? Is that the will of God? Is it consistent with God's nature? All of those things. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that's all things that I do. Like that kind of gives me like a little bit of a license to be skeptical of stuff like Brother Ewan and some of the other things. Because I don't necessarily hear those and think of me like, oh yeah, this is divine. My certain things like that. I know we don't necessarily agree on that.
What would then? So for listeners, we read the book UFO of God, and that's sparked a bunch of conversation about aliens and orbs. Like, so one of my thoughts during it is I'm skeptical of it too, of these interactions with beings outside of our realm. You can call them aliens, you can call them angels, demons, whatever you may be. I've always thought, okay, how would I know that
good question
having a holy encounter? I feel like it's not fairly easy, but easier to discern something that is evil. Mm-hmm. But when and how would I have a holy encounter and be able to walk away and be like, that was God, or that was an angel, or how am I not deceived?
You've had that, hasn't you?
Not to the level of like seeing an alien. I've had like the Holy Spirit. Yes, I felt the Holy Spirit. I'm talking about like a physical, like seeing something of
that bright and shining one.
Yeah, like, okay, UFO of God. There's the guy sees these orbs, these flying orbs, and I think a ton of people question him, and us included, in a lot of ways of like, what is that Satan deceiving you? Are these orbs deceitful, or is it truly God trying to communicate? Like the extremes, I feel like you put yourself in these extremes of it's either incredible or absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
So in First John, he talks about this is how you recognize spirits that are from God, if they recognize Jesus Christ as God.
That's the same thing it says on Deuteronomy 18. So it says, I will raise up from them a prophet like you among them, and I'll put my words in his mouth, tell them everything I commanded. I myself will call to account anyone who doesn't listen to my word. But a prophet who speaks in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. You may say to yourself, how could we know when a message has not been spoken by God?
Right.
If what a prophet proclaims in the name of God does not take place, then God didn't say it. Is what it says.
Say that last sentence again.
So it says. That was me paraphrasing, but if it says, if what, I'm paraphrasing the Bible. Forgive me the word.
This is a false prophet.
False prophet. Oh
my God.
This is exactly
So,
what
We're waiting with the lightning.
If you make a profit off of the prophet, if what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken.
That's interesting.
Which, okay, and that guy made 2
Boy, how hard is that?
I know.
Because Isaiah made prophecies thousands of years in advance, or 500 years, or whatever, in advance of the Messiah.
Right.
So then when it did come true, then they're, oh yeah, he's finally vindicated.
Yeah,
Right.
but I mean, it was 20 generations later.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And he was probably like, why didn't you believe me?
Yeah, First
Right.
John says, this is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God.
Right. Yep.
So if the Spirit acknowledges Christ came in the flesh,